When democracy gets messy, Newcastle braces for political chaos. Before we dive into what promises to be one of the most politically charged weekends Newcastle has seen in years, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, with the way British politics is spiraling these days, you'll want UK conners in your corner to decode the madness that passes for democratic discourse in this country. Right then, let's talk about Newcastle upon Tyne, shall we? That proud industrial city that once powered the British Empire with its coal and steel, now finding itself the unlikely battleground for political circus that would make Barnum and Bailey weep with envy. This weekend, the Geordie capital isn't just hosting the usual Saturday shoppers and football fans. It's become ground zero for a clash of ideologies that perfectly encapsulates everything that's both magnificent and utterly balmy about British democracy. Picture the scene. UKIP, that perennial thorn in the side of mainstream politics, has decided to stage a march through Newcastle city centre calling for nothing less than mass deportations. Yes, you heard that correctly. Mass deportations, delivered with all the subtlety of a brick through a window. They are not just content with a quiet gathering in a community centre with tea and biscuits. They want a full-blown march with speeches, presumably complete with a sort of rhetoric that makes even hardened political observers reach for their blood pressure medication. But here's where it gets properly interesting, because democracy rarely operates in a vacuum, does it? Simultaneously, a counter-protest is being organized, with authorities warning of significant numbers expected to turn up. So we have protesters protesting protesters, which is democracy in action, albeit the sort of democracy that requires police in riot gear and enhanced stop-and-search powers to prevent it from descending into complete chaos. Northumbria police, bless their cotton socks, have essentially transformed Newcastle city centre into something resembling a mild police state for the day, complete with powers that would make authoritarian regimes rather envious. They've got enhanced stop-and-search powers, allowing officers to search anyone and anything that moves. They got powers to control the movement of protesters, essentially turning the ancient right to assembly into a carefully choreographed dance with the state calling the steps. And perhaps most tellingly, they got powers to remove face coverings, because apparently nothing says protecting democracy quite like forcing people to show their faces to the authorities. The irony is so thick you could spread it on toast. Here we have a political movement that presumably champions freedom and British values demanding the right to march through a city while that very march necessitates the suspension of various civil liberties for everyone else. It's like claiming to defend democracy by temporarily abolishing it, which is either brilliantly postmodern or completely bonkers, depending on your perspective. But wait, there's more, because this isn't just about UKIP having a Saturday stroll. Enter Ben Habib and his advanced party, staging what they are calling a launch event in Newcastle, which they declared the symbolic heart of Brexit. Now, there's a claim that requires some unpacking, because Newcastle, along with the broader Northeast, voted quite decisively to remain in the European Union. Calling a Remain voting city the symbolic heart of Brexit is rather like calling a vegetarian restaurant the spiritual home of beef Wellington. It's technically possible, but you'd need some serious mental gymnastics to make it work. Habib's choice of Newcastle isn't accidental, of course. There's something deeply calculated about political movements choosing to stage their events in places where they're explicitly unwelcome. It's provocation masquerading as principle, designed to generate exactly the sort of heated response that will fill news cycles and social media feeds. The message is clear. We'll go where we want, when we want, regardless of what the locals think, because that's what freedom means. Kim McGuinness, the Northeast mayor, has responded with a sort of diplomatic bluntness that only British politicians can truly master. In a statement that was polite enough to avoid legal trouble but pointed enough to draw blood, she declared that Habib's party and its high-profile backers simply don't belong in the Northeast. It's a political equivalent of a bouncer telling someone they are not on the list. Technically civil, but leaving no doubt about where they stand. The police response tells its own story about the state of British democracy in 2025. When peaceful protest requires this level of preparation and control, when officers need enhanced powers just to manage people exercising their democratic rights, we're looking at something more complex than simple law enforcement. This is democracy under pressure, creaking at the joints, requiring increasingly authoritarian measures to function at all. The geographical choreography is particularly revealing. Protesters are being corralled into specific areas: the Monument, the Quayside, outside the Civic Centre, John Dobson Street. Democracy, it seems, comes with a postcode restriction. You can exercise your right to free speech, but only in designated zones, at designated times, under the watchful eye of officers equipped with enhanced search powers. It's freedom with footnotes, liberty with licensing requirements. What's particularly fascinating is how this reflects the broader trajectory of British politics since Brexit. The referendum was supposed to restore sovereignty and democratic control, yet here we are, watching democracy play out under conditions that would have been unthinkable just a decade ago. The tools of state control have been normalized, justified by the need to manage the very democratic forces that Brexit was meant to unleash. The counter-protesters represent another layer of complexity. These aren't professional agitators or paid activists. These are ordinary people who decided that some views are so objectionable they warrant taking to the streets on a Saturday afternoon. It's grassroots democracy in action, the sort of civic engagement that political theorists celebrate, right up until it requires riot police to manage. There's something profoundly British about the whole spectacle. We've turned political protest into a bureaucratic exercise, complete with designated zones, official permissions, and police liaison officers. It's revolution by appointment, dissent with proper paperwork. The authorities have managed to simultaneously protect the right to protest while rendering it almost completely harmless, which is either a triumph of pragmatic governance or the death of meaningful political engagement. The UKIP march calling for mass deportations represents something darker and more troubling than mere political disagreement. This isn't about policy nuances or different approaches to immigration. This is about the fundamental character of the society we want to live in. Mass deportations aren't a policy position. They're a statement of intent about who belongs and who doesn't, who counts as British and who remains forever other. Yet here's a democratic paradox. These views, however repugnant many might find them, have to be allowed expression in a free society. The moment we start deciding which political positions are acceptable and which aren't, we stop being democracy and become something else entirely. The counter-protesters understand this, which is why they are not calling for the march to be banned. They are simply insisting on their equal right to be heard. The enhanced police powers tell a story about trust, or rather its absence. When authorities need the power to search anyone, control movement, and remove face coverings, they are essentially admitting that normal policing isn't sufficient. These aren't powers you deploy for ordinary political events. These are tools of crowd control that suggest the authorities expect something closer to civil unrest and civilized debate. Newcastle itself becomes a character in this drama. This is a city that's been through everything: industrial decline, economic transformation, cultural renaissance, political upheaval. Its people have seen governments come and go, industries rise and fall, promises made and broken. Now they are watching their city center turned into a controlled zone so that political movements can exercise their democratic rights under police supervision. The timing is no coincidence either. This is happening at a moment when faith in democratic institutions is at historic lows, when political discourse has been poisoned by years of increasingly toxic rhetoric, when the very idea of shared truth seems almost quaint. Staging confrontational political events under these conditions isn't just provocative, it's potentially inflammatory in ways that could have consequences far beyond a Saturday afternoon in Newcastle. Ben Habib's claim about Newcastle being the symbolic heart of Brexit reveals something important about how political narratives work. Fact become malleable, history gets rewritten, and symbolic meaning trumps actual reality. A Remain voting city becomes a Brexit stronghold through the power of assertion, because in modern politics, saying something loudly and confidently enough can sometimes make it true. The mayor's response, that these people don't belong, raises fundamental questions about political geography and democratic legitimacy. Who gets to say who belongs where? Is political identity tied to place? And if so, what happens when movements decide to go where they're not wanted? These aren't abstract questions. They're being played out in real time on the streets of Newcastle. The police powers represent a broader trend toward the militarization of protest management. Enhanced stop-and search, movement control, face covering removal. These are techniques borrowed from counterterrorism and riot control, now being applied to ordinary political demonstrations. It's the normalization of exceptional measures, the gradual erosion of the presumption that democratic activity should be largely self-regulating. What's happening in Newcastle this weekend is bigger than just another political protest. It's a stress test of British democracy, a real-time experiment in how much tension the system can absorb before something breaks. The fact that it requires this level of police preparation suggests we're already closer to that breaking point than many would care to admit. The parallel protests create a perfect microcosm of contemporary British politics. Two sides talking past each other, requiring state intervention to prevent violence, generating more heat than light. It's democracy as contact sport, with the police as reluctant referees trying to prevent the players from seriously injuring each other. This is what democracy looks like when the center cannot hold, when shared values give way to competing visions of what Britain should be. It's messy, uncomfortable, potentially dangerous, and absolutely essential. Because the alternative to this controlled chaos isn't peaceful consensus. It's a kind of silence that comes when one side has definitively won and the other has been forced to shut up entirely. So keep your eyes on Newcastle this weekend, because what happens there will tell us something important about the state of British democracy. And make sure you're subscribed to UK Connors, because this story is far from over, and the implications will be reverberating through British politics long after the last protester has gone home.